Hey guys, and welcome to episode 135 of the OCD Stories.com podcast. Now, this is a story-based episode, and in this episode I interviewed Anna Foster. Now, Anna is a BBC Newcastle breakfast radio host, and I got Anna on because I've been following her stuff on social media for a while, and I've just liked the vibe she's been putting out, so I wanted to get her on to go more in depth into her story. And she didn't disappoint. This episode, I really enjoyed it. There's lots of good information in here, and her story was compelling and touching, so it's good to hear that. But some of the things that we discuss, beyond obviously the normal questions I would have asked, is why sort of the OCD theme isn't important, because it just morphs. It's the OCD that needs to be tackled. We talk about maternal OCD and how she silenced herself and her thoughts because of fear that her kids may be taken away, so we discuss that. She makes a good point of no one would have known she was suffering up to a couple of years ago, even though it's gone on pretty much her whole life, and how she just kept it secret. We talk about there's nothing wrong with triggers, because triggers, that's how you get better, when you have to kind of face it. She gave some good sort of motivational wisdom of just keep putting one foot in front of the other in therapy and recovery. How she found a sense of freedom from her ERP, her therapy. Talk about general things like getting enough sleep, enough rest, keeping stress low. She shares her biggest epiphany in recovery, and that questions don't have to be answered. Now, these are OCD questions. They don't have to be answered, and we can live with that uncertainty, as uncomfortable as that can be at times. She talks about regret. That's come a few times on the podcast, about regretting what you missed because of what you've gone through. And that was worth going into more detail. Then I asked her sort of her advice for parents. So that's people with OCD who are parents, and advice for them. So hopefully that helps you if you're in that boat. And words at the end was do ERP. I think you're going to like this episode. She's a bubbly character and just a good human being. So without further ado, here is Anna. On the podcast today, I have Anna Foster, who has kindly agreed to share her OCD story with us. Welcome to the show, Anna.
Thank you very much for having me. I feel honoured and a bit terrified, given the calibre of guests that you have.
No, I'm sure it'll be good. And obviously, I've followed you on social media for a while, and I believe this is the first time you're sharing your OCD experience.
Yes, first time ever, because you'll have just seen loads of pictures of dogs and then quite a lot of OCD retweets, but never, I've got it. Yeah.
Okay, so well, this is a big step then. So
yeah, it's massive. Yeah, it is. Cool. Yeah, it's huge.
So I'll leave it entirely up to you then, how much you want to share throughout. But yeah, it'd be good to get your OCD story in as little or as much detail as you want to give.
Well, it's quite long, because I'm getting really old now. I'm 45, and I have probably, now that I know what OCD is, I would say I have had obsessive compulsive disorder since I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. That's my kind of first memories of it, is being in bed and jumping out of bed and jumping back into bed and doing it 5 or 6 times just to make sure that everything was all right and that my mum and dad didn't die. Very kind of typical beginning to an OCD story. And I remember being absolutely exhausted one night after a school trip, and I went to a weird kind of St Trinian's boarding school. It was just like St Trinian's. Except with the staff were probably more drunk, and the head teacher was my dad, and the headmistress was my mum. So it was a bit of a weird upbringing, but lovely family, and some highs and lows and kind of upbringing. But so, and I remember coming home after this school trip and saying to my mum, I'm really tired, I don't want to do my exercises. And she said, what do you mean exercises? And I said, well, I'll just turn my phone off. I said, I have to get out of bed once I'm in bed, and I have to go to the school loos, and I have to bend up and down 180 times, and I have to do it. And she obviously didn't know what OCD was. Yeah. So she just said, you don't have to do that. Don't do that tonight. So I didn't. But likewise, I didn't get diagnosed with OCD. So of course, I just carried on doing silly things and not telling anybody really. And I probably did that sort of magical thinking type of OCD, which so many people do that you speak to, till I was about 12 or 13, and it was sort of manageable. And then I remember hitting my teens and it just getting just way, way worse. All the girls that I shared a dormitory with, they would all laugh at me because I would I would never just leave a room. I would leave a room and look in a mirror 20 times to get the right thoughts so that my boyfriend didn't die or that he didn't dump me, or all magic kind
Yeah.
of thinking, and that everything would be all right. So even at that point, it was getting quite unmanageable. And I remember going to the doctor and they didn't know what it was. Even in 1988, 1989, they just thought I was just an anxious teenager. So nobody talked about exposure therapy. Nobody talked about OCD. They just didn't diagnose me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it carried on really, and it just got quite a bit worse, and it sort of morphed, which is what this bloody thing does. It morphs, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it morphed from being sort of making sure that everybody else was okay to then having obsessions about myself and keeping myself safe. And then I remember when I started having those obsessions about keeping myself safe, I then felt mortified and guilty because I was spending so much time thinking about keeping myself safe.
Yeah.
And then I carried on with life. I went to university. I got the AIDS one at university because you obviously get that one when you go to university and you sleep with somebody you shouldn't.
Me too.
Yeah, so we've all done that.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not all of us. Maybe not everybody's as badly behaved as me. Wasn't that badly behaved, but did have a dalliance that I probably shouldn't have done, but you do that at uni.
Yeah.
And then, of course, so it had gone from harm OCD, not harm OCD at that point, keeping myself from harm.
Okay.
And then at university, I got the AIDS. I couldn't even hear the word AIDS. I went for blood tests. I gave blood, as a lot of people do, utterly convinced. And even when I was told I didn't have it, I was still convinced I did have it. And, washing and all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I feel like I could be boring you. Isn't that
No,
weird?
no.
The way I've never told it before.
If I'm quiet, I'm just trying to be a good listener.
Yeah. You learn that in interview school. But and then university was a bit of a nightmare because of my OCD. I dropped out of university. Also because I hated my course because I'd ballsed up my A levels. So I hated my course, but I'd ballsed up my A levels probably because of OCD. So when I look back, it affected everything from your education to the path that you take.
I can completely agree with that. I did the same.
Did you?
Yeah, I ballsed up my A levels, ballsed up my entire school life, and it wasn't until I got to university that I did turn it around because I found some enjoyment in it. But I had quote-unquote learning difficulties all throughout school, which in hindsight, I look back, I just think I was distracted.
Yeah, just distracted by trying to get right thoughts and trying to feel the right things and what have you. And I probably, I didn't behave in a way that was different from anybody else, but if I went out, drinking at uni, it would make me feel a lot worse than everybody else. My OCD would be awful the next day. And because I think sometimes people with OCD have such high expectations and sort of a bit perfectionist about how their own behavior should be.
Yeah.
So, so I dropped out and, and then made all sorts of mistakes and then ended up going to music college to study opera. I don't quite know how that happened, but I'm sort of a failed classical singer as well. And then OCD just took a really bad hold again when I was in London. And I actually had trans OCD then. I was like, oh my God, what if you're gay? Oh no, wait, not what if you're gay. What if you're a gay man in a woman's body? And I know that's quite typical. Quite a lot of people have that one, don't they?
More
And
so recently as well because of all the news and
I mean, that's really weird that I haven't got it now at all. And I interview heaps of trans people, and I don't feel,
yeah,
because that isn't my trigger at the minute. So it just goes to show you that actually doesn't matter what the thought is. It
yeah.
doesn't matter what it is, and it
It's
doesn't
all
matter what your
OCD, isn't
theme
it?
is. It's all bloody
Yeah,
OCD.
yeah.
Yeah.
Really good
So
point.
yeah. So that was it really. I had that one, and I ended up. I did end up in the Priory actually. My local authority back in Yorkshire paid for some sort of in-house therapy. But I literally got a one-on-one maybe twice a week. I was only in there for 3 weeks. And other than that, I was doing yoga. And that just, as much as I know yoga's brilliant, that wasn't what I needed at the time. I just needed,
Yeah.
whacking over the head with ERP, and I didn't get it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You probably got more flexible as a result. So
Yeah, I did.
silver
And
lining.
I met lots of very posh drug addicts as well.
Oh, yeah.
But they're all recovered now, so it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how for those listening, because we have a lot of American listeners and Canadian. The Priory it does many things, but it made its name for sort of celebrities with drug addictions going in, and
yeah.
Okay, so thanks for that. Was there anything else you wanted to go into before I kind of
because I think the really important thing was that all the way through that, and I had been given fluoxetine at that point, but I wasn't really taking it properly, and I wasn't doing the ERP properly because, to be fair, there was one therapist there, a guy called Colin Blower, who I don't know where Colin is now, but he was great, but I just wasn't seeing him enough, and I wasn't doing it enough, and I wasn't doing the ERP, and we didn't call it ERP then. It was just he would say, whatever you think, I'll think worse, and we would sort of have this thought off.
Yeah.
You think a nasty thought, I can think nastier, and then he'd think something, and I'd go, yeah, but I can imagine it like this. So we used to do that, and he was good, but anyhow, long shot was I wasn't really recovered, and then I had children, and at that point, I have to say, I think maternal OCD is just about the coolest thing that can ever happen to a person, and I still get really emotional now, and I've got to be really careful not to. But looking at your newborn baby, and it that's the thing that's the closest to you in the world, the thing that you care about the most in the world, and the thing that you would jump in front of a bus for, that you would die for. And if you get harm OCD about your children, well, it's utterly, utterly devastating. And I didn't dare tell anybody because I was frightened they would take my children away from me. Yeah. Which, has been the case for so many people with maternal OCD. And it's, and if anything, to share that bit of my story, if I can make one woman or man, mother or father, feel better, and to feel that they're going to be okay and recovery is possible from that is really important.
No, thank you for sharing that, and I completely agree. Obviously a social worker or whatever it is, social worker, the nurse, whoever comes to visit the new mum or the new dad. You can tell I haven't had kids because I'm completely lost by the terminology. But
they're really expensive, by the way. Yeah. Take your time to think. They're really good. They're really good. We're best friends now, and I love them very dearly, but they're expensive.
Yeah. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. And obviously, if they have no idea what OCD is and no idea the things it can latch onto, you can see why some of them may jump to conclusions and think,
of course, because child safety is the most important thing.
Absolutely. And if they don't take precautions, then it's their neck on the line, so to speak. But the more people that talk up about it, such as yourself, and Catherine, who's also been on this podcast, she's talked about it. You start to break away, and maybe there's a social worker or whoever listening to this, and then next time that happens, they're like, oh, hang on a minute, what happens if it's OCD? And then, so effectively you're doing a good service there.
Well, I understand the position there, and of course, the most important thing is child safety. But it's interesting because in my day job, so I work as a journalist presenter on a local BBC station, and we did a very big piece recently about paedophiles
Mm.
and people watching things they shouldn't be watching, and how that's rising across the country, really. And we had a psychologist on, and I said, sorry, we had a psychiatrist on, and I said, it's so important that we at this point, because I was very aware of thinking, if people are listening to this, they will be
Triggered.
they will be triggered to be beyond triggered by this. I said, can you just explain the difference between somebody having an intrusive thought and genuinely having these thoughts? And he just was like, oh, well, that's an entirely different thing. That's obsessional compulsive disorder. That's an entirely different thing. And I thought, good, I'm glad you've said that. And I'm glad you understand that. That was really, really important.
No, that's really good. That is it a he or she?
Yeah, it was a he. Yeah,
That
it was a he. Yeah.
that he knew the difference, because he could have easily gone, there is no difference, or something like this.
Oh, no, yeah. He straight away, he just went, well, it's just not the same thing at all. Yeah. And I thought, I'm really glad that he said that.
Yeah.
So I just think that's, I just want to get that message across, that don't be frightened to share it. Don't be frightened to share it, and you are going to get better, and you can get better, and recovery is possible. But sometimes you have to hit a real low first. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah. You finally got to get the motivation as well to kind of fight it, because I mean, it doesn't sound like you got adequate treatment when you did those 3 weeks inpatient. Not criticising the Priory, but it's a matter of time.
It was 20 years ago.
Exactly. So, but also you may not have hit a point where you were like, I'm ready to do whatever it takes.
No, I hadn't hit that point, and I hadn't hit that point. I think there were parts of the treatment that were good, but I hadn't hit that point because I could still function. So I hadn't. I just hadn't hit it, and it was when I had my children. Actually, it was when I'd had my first baby. I did eventually get referred to somebody in the NHS who was good, but again, I just was not ready to do ERP. He would make me write things down, say words. I would go straight home and shower. I would clean all my clothes. Anybody only had to mention the name of a serial killer. If you mentioned the name Anthony Hopkins, oh my God, I would be, because that's my absolute number one top dollar fear. I would be upstairs showering, so I wasn't doing the ERP, and you can't get better. I think if you only half do it, I think you've got to jump off that top board.
That's a good point. Yeah, you wouldn't go into a football game and kind of half-arse it. You'd go in trying to win.
Yeah, and I wasn't. I was kidding myself. I was just kidding myself. But I was too frightened at that point. But exactly like you said, Stu, I hadn't hit that mega low. Which I did 2 years ago. November 2016 is when I hit my, oh dear.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, because I think that's an interesting point. I have one question though. So when did you kind of realise something's not right here?
Teenage years, I would say probably even before. I knew that it was taking time, that it wasn't. I was tired. I was really tired as a kid, and I knew that wasn't right. And I remember going on a holiday when I was about 13. I went on a school skiing holiday, and I remember buying this coat, and because I hadn't got right thoughts when I bought the coat, I was in floods of tears, massive panic attack, and I knew that wasn't right. So even then, but all those years ago, I wasted all that time not getting proper treatment. I do remember one psychiatrist actually putting a rubber band on my hand and just saying, every time you get a thought that you don't want, just click this band. And I just thought, well, actually, it's just giving me a bloody sore wrist. That. And so now I've got bloody intrusive thoughts and a sore wrist. Anyway, so that work.
Okay. No, thank you for that. And tell me about November 2016. So that sort of rock bottom.
Yeah, so I had felt it kind of getting um, more all-encompassing to the point where I just couldn't think of anything else. I got no enjoyment out of life. People wouldn't have known that. I mean, I worked on the radio. Nobody would have known.
Yeah.
I host events, I host fashion shows. Nobody would have known. But I just got to a point where, yeah, I get so emotional. I'm really
That's
sorry.
okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Do other people get emotional
They
at this
do.
point?
They do. So you're fine.
Yeah. So it was progressively getting worse and worse. And actually, at work, I had I'd done a couple of OCD interviews, and I'd done one with Adam, who I know you've interviewed before, Adam Shaw.
Oh, yep. Yep.
Yeah. And I'd read his book, and it was, he had harm OCD, and it was me, and it was the first time really that I'd sort of read anything solid about somebody having the same. Obviously, I thought his thoughts weren't as bad as mine. I was like, stabbing, that's small fry. That's not that, mate. You want to go as violent as I can go. You always think that. You think your thoughts are always way worse. But that had kind of triggered something in me thinking, oh, right, there was almost a point where I thought, I've got to get help. But I don't know if the book was almost a little bit of a trigger. Reading the book was almost a bit of a trigger in a sense. And there's nothing wrong with triggers. You've got to have triggers. It's how you get better. But I think I felt like I'd only been living a half a life and nobody knew it. Like literally a half a life, a life on the surface, and this constant layering of chatter underneath, this constant like dichotomy of personality, sort of underneath. So it had started to get worse and worse and worse. And the girls that I worked with, my producers on the show that I was working on, Laura and Claire and Jane, were absolutely a bunch of wonderful women. And I'd never before said to anybody, I've got it. And I said, girls, Laura, who was producing me at the time, just said, you're not well. Because I would be opening my microphone, talking, doing a perfectly decent link, closing the microphone and just crying. Because I just couldn't get rid of the thoughts. Even when I was doing a show, I couldn't get rid of the thoughts. And then going for walks, nothing. I couldn't get any joy out of anything. And then in November, we'd had a really big party. I drunk heaps because I wasn't very well. I drunk loads. And I woke up the next morning and I hope I'm not triggering anybody by saying this, but I just felt that my life wasn't worth living. I just kept getting these suicidal thoughts all the time, thinking, oh, you're not worth anything, because, to have these thoughts about people that you love and to have these thoughts about anybody, you're just not worth it. And I literally, and I was having all manner of insane thoughts about blinking and thinking about what you're seeing and how you're seeing the world, and just bonkers, and I couldn't get rid of them. And my husband, who's absolutely brilliant, he's great, he said, oh yeah, this is a bit different, we need help. I said, yeah, we really, really need help, and we kind of need it now. But of course you don't get it now, do you? Even when you're having a crisis, it doesn't happen like that. So I still went to work though. I didn't miss a single shift, and I think that's really important, actually.
Yeah, very important.
So I went to work the next day, but I'd emailed my colleagues and I'd emailed my bosses at the BBC, and they were so good. I said, look, I'm really poorly. I've got to come clean with you. My mental health is awful, but I love my job. And I think it's if you can, and if you're listening to this show and you're listening to Stuart's podcast and you're thinking, oh, I can't do this and I can't do that, I think that putting one foot in front of the other was actually really vital to me. Making it through in a way and going to work, because it makes you think about something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, and good for you, because if you had stopped, then now you're at home, probably alone. It's stuck in your head even more. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's being alone is horrendous. I did there was one quite funny moment when so after the show I had to go and interview that morning, the Monday morning I had to go and interview the head of the ambulance service in the northeast. So I went down to the ambulance service and in my head I was thinking, I'm suicidal, I want to die at the minute. I feel so horrendous, but I
Yeah.
had to get myself together, go in and interview the head. So I did this. Nobody knew what was going on because that's what happens with mental health. Nobody knows what's going on in your head.
Yeah.
So I get back out to the car. I put the key in the car and I phone my sister and she starts talking to me saying, have a hot bath and light a candle. I mean, she's lovely, but I was like, and I'd left the key in the car. So my battery went flat. So at this
Ah.
point, I was intrusive thoughts and a flat battery and desperate for help. So my husband said, I'll come and get you. So that was 45 minutes. So I got out of the car, walked down the quayside in Gateshead, and I felt so panicked. I saw a horse and I thought, go and stroke an animal, that'll make you feel better. So I put my arms around this horse, forgetting as well that I was madly allergic to horses.
Ah.
So I had a massive asthma attack and feeling suicidal at the same time. I can laugh at that now, but I
Yeah.
didn't laugh at it at the time.
That's a good story.
Yeah.
And so when did your husband find out? Was that around the same time as the colleagues, or did he know before?
Oh, he knew almost from the moment I started going out with
Okay.
him. Yeah, because I used to, when I said goodbye to him, I'd kind of look 3 times and he's like, why does she look 3 times when she drives past? And then he just asked me and I went, oh, I've got this thing. It's called OCD. And yeah, he's a just proper Geordie, down to earth, great. Well, he's a sand dancer technically because he's from St Shields. Great bloke and very
Yeah.
grounding and just accepting of it. Because yeah, he thinks I'm worth putting up with for that. My OCD's worth putting up with
Absolutely.
because I let him go on lads' holidays.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good side. There's more to you than OCD. That's really important to remember. Yeah,
Absolutely. Very true. Well,
yeah,
thank you for sharing that. So no, it wasn't easy.
yeah.
So
Yeah, so after that happened, eventually, one thing and another, I referred myself to the mental health crisis team, which you can do. And I think lots of people don't know that in this country, that you can do if you don't get the help you need. Because, first doctor was like, oh, you just need some beta blockers. And I said, no, I don't. I need fluoxetine and I need diazepam. I need it now. So, yeah. And then I was put through on the talking therapy, the talking therapy that you sometimes get through the mental health
yes.
crisis teams.
Yeah.
But there was about probably 20 people in the room, and
Oh,
I knew it wasn't right. So I had already found, but this was just before my crisis, but I just couldn't get in with him earlier, a great CBT therapist in Northumberland called Mark Latham, and he is absolutely brilliant. So I started seeing him, and I started on the road to recovery 2 years ago. Yeah,
nice.
yeah, proper recovery for the first time since I was 7.
Wow. And how
Yeah,
does that feel?
it felt. I felt like I felt freedom
Yeah.
that I had never felt in 25 years, 30 years more.
Mm.
It was it was just that sense of freedom. I just couldn't possibly imagine having that sense of freedom,
Mm.
and that's extraordinary. And I was on quite a lot of drugs at that point, I have to say, because I'd been so poorly. And to be honest, I was probably on too much. I was on 60 milligrams of fluoxetine,
Mm.
which is a lot, isn't it?
I'm not
Um,
too clued up on medication side of things.
yeah. So I was on quite a lot, and it just makes you talk quickly and not sleep. But it gave me, because I was severely depressed from the OCD, it gave me that lift to be able to go into recovery. See what I mean? To be able to face the ERP.
Yeah.
And I'm not on 60 now. I am on 20. And I would like ultimately to get off that.
Okay.
Definitely, I would like to get off it. But I'm also realistic. When you've had OCD for 30 plus years. It's not gonna, I'm not gonna beat myself up about being on it.
No,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, but yeah. So the ERP is it. It's really hard, but unless you do it, I'm a really firm believer that unless you do it, unless you dive off the top board and walk over the coals and any other metaphor that you can think of, you you don't really get better. Um, and ultimately, you want to be able to get better. You don't want to manage it. You want to be able to get better, and recovery is possible, but you've got to put the work in.
Absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I always think it is hard, as with any therapy, but especially ERP. It is hard, but it's not as hard as living with OCD.
Absolutely. What's the alternative? Well,
Yeah,
the alternative is living half a life, and I just, well, the alternative was ending up in the mental health crisis team,
yeah,
and
over and over again.
yeah, and
Mm.
that week was, and if somebody said to me, "Do you want to skydive or do you want to do that week again?" I would skydive. Literally, I
And
would.
run through a pit of snakes and
Yeah, naked, probably. Yeah, it was the worst
yeah.
ever, just the worst. And I still get frightened now, and I
Mm.
still, yeah. And funnily enough, I don't know if this is worth mentioning, but if there are women listening that are kind of, I don't know, maybe approaching menopause, I don't know if I am, but I feel like you get moods, you get highs and lows with your moods anyway, with your female cycle. And I feel that my OCD sometimes gets worse and I get less resilient around that
Okay.
time. Um, I don't know if other women have found that, but once you pinpoint that and think, oh yeah, that's why it's happening. That's why I'm feeling a little bit less resilient than I normally do. It's a bit more understandable, and you could sort of forgive yourself for a bit.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that makes a lot of sense. And I think that advice goes for everyone, not so much around menopause, obviously, for men, but just
yeah,
like for me, being able to label, like if I suddenly, I was driving home the other day and I started getting anxious and I'm like, what? And this feeling of impending doom. And I was like,
yeah,
why am I feeling like this? And I just took a second to just review the last couple hours and I'm like, okay, well, this happened, which triggered me. This is a bit uncertain. And I'm like, okay, it makes sense why I feel this way. And that allowed me to then just live with it. And then it passed, as
yeah,
opposed to reacting and not understanding why I was feeling this way.
yeah. And that's the other thing as well, is that I think sometimes people with OCD can actually be really strong people,
Yeah.
but also I think sometimes uh, people would say to me, "Oh, you're really tired. You've got your job's really high pressured, and you're getting up at 4:30 every morning, and
Mm.
you work weekends, and you freelance, and you've got money pressure. All of that when you freelance, and you know."
Yeah.
You've got that, and I would say it's nothing to do with that. It's my OCD and it's my intrusive thoughts. It's got absolutely nothing to do with the fact that I'm tired. But actually, tiredness
Yeah.
really, lack of sleep. I've just read this book by Matthew Walker called Why We Sleep. I'm sure
Yeah.
you've probably read it
I
and
haven't read it, but I've heard a lot about it.
you'd have heard a lot about it. And, it is going to affect your mental health and it is going to affect your ability to do ERP. So I think there is a certain sense that despite your OCD, get some sleep, eat well, try and get yourself fit-ish if you can, because all of that will help with your recovery. Even if in your head you're going, no, that's not going to stop me getting intrusive thoughts. Well, no, it might not, but it might make you a little bit more strong to be able to deal with it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, lowering stress. When stress is higher, like from everyone I've spoken, not everyone, but a lot of people I've spoken to, there's always a clear indication when stress is higher that they're more anxious, they have more intrusive thoughts.
yeah,
So yeah, which is why where things like yoga come back in, or I spoke to Aaron last episode.
yeah,
He talks about surfing for him.
yeah,
It helps him. Um, not obviously beat OCD, but it helps keep stress low. And when stress is low, he notices he's triggered less.
yeah. I would absolutely agree with that. And I went skiing at the beginning of this year, and I haven't been for 10 years. It's expensive, so I haven't been
Yeah,
for 10 years. And I was really naughty. I left my three children at home. They're old enough to be left at home, by the way. um, and and just that week of skiing hard, fresh air, exercise.
mm,
I couldn't believe it. I felt reasonably, of course I had intrusive thoughts,
Yeah.
but not as much. And you think, well, maybe it is because you're getting sleep. Maybe it is because you're exercising hard, and all of those things are worth remembering. I think if you want to recover, you've got to think of every little thing that you can do
Yeah.
to try. There's almost a sense of you've got to take responsibility for it yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. The therapist can only do so much.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
it's on the individual to do the homework, and then also do the look at their life and change lifestyle things as and where they think's needed.
Yeah. I mean, and doing what your therapist says, I am not an angel. I have been asked to watch a movie and I still haven't watched it, and I won't watch it, and I've got to watch it, and it's ERP and I've got to watch it. It's a movie about serial killers. But unless I do that, then I'm not doing a disservice to Mark. I'm doing a disservice to me, as well as him. And he's been brilliant, I have to say, and because I've been in therapy for a long time, and he's very aware that it's a long time, so we've put an end date on it, and that's quite interesting, having to put an end date on it. But otherwise, you can almost become, and I think he's very aware that you can become
dependent, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and he doesn't want me to become dependent, and I understand that. But he also understands that I've been poorly for a really, really, really long time. To unpack 30 years of, I shall never do this, I shall never do that, I would have about 30 things I would say to myself probably about 1,000 times every day.
Yeah.
That's quite a hard pattern to break.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no, you're completely right. And I'm pretty sure Beck, who originally created CBT, his goal was basically by the end of treatment, the goal is the client or the patient becomes their own therapist. They know everything they could possibly know in this area, and they can continue the work themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually Mark has, which I'm sure, a lot of people that you speak to will say that when you finish your therapy, there's a sort of an exit plan, so that we're going to talk about that week. Because, even talking about it to you now, Stuart, I feel myself getting emotional and frightened about that week. Well, I've got to face that week and of what happened, or that couple of weeks of my sort of crisis. And you have to face that, and you have to face, well, if that happens again, these are the tools. There is always hope. There will always be hope, and there's always light at the end of the tunnel, and things don't stay the same. In that moment of panic where you think you're going to be in that forever. And I think I can't look at anybody again because when I'm looking at them, I can't get the right thoughts. And so what's the point of living? Those thoughts aren't going to stay there.
Yeah.
You will go out again and have a walk and enjoy it. You'll laugh again, all of those things. And even at that moment when you're feeling as bad as you feel, and you might not believe that you'll feel like that again, you will. You will laugh again.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it's a good point. Okay, so what do you feel was your kind of biggest epiphany or breakthrough moment in your recovery? Kind of a light bulb situation.
Yeah, well, obviously the ERP and saying words that I hadn't said in 20 years. I mean, I didn't even used to like to say the word meat, and now I can say that word. So saying words that I hadn't said was a big thing.
Yeah.
And various things like that were good little milestones, but they weren't the epiphany moment. I think I had an epiphany moment. It was actually on my son's, I think it was his 19th birthday, so it was last year. And I remember going for a walk with him and thinking, oh God, you can't get right thoughts. I can't get right thoughts about him. I can't get right thoughts about him. And I suddenly had this, it doesn't matter, but not, it doesn't matter as in a ritual. It doesn't matter, because you can, I think a lot of people with OCD can say to themselves, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. But that's just a ritual.
Yeah.
You don't actually believe it doesn't matter. And I suddenly thought, Anna, it actually doesn't matter. actually really doesn't matter. Not just you're not saying it, it really doesn't matter. And it was that sudden acceptance, like the act,
Yeah.
accept it. It was that moment of absolute acceptance of,
What your brain was giving you.
yeah, and
Yeah.
just, well, it really doesn't matter actually, rather than just thinking it as a ritual. I don't know, does that make sense?
No, I get it. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you're kind of saying, yeah, it doesn't matter. But people say that, oh, it doesn't matter. It's just OCD, or it doesn't matter. I'm basically just trying to lower your anxiety.
Yeah, but they
But
don't believe it.
no, yeah, and in that moment, you had that breakthrough of it's just a thought.
Yeah,
It has no power. It means nothing. It's just there.
it,
It's a
yeah,
feeling, right? More than a thought is how I describe
yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah. It is a feeling, and the doing nothing, because I had become so poorly, I didn't know how to do nothing.
Hmm.
So even when I thought I was doing nothing, because Mark will say to me, we do nothing. Well, when the thought's there, I go, well, I can't get rid of it. Well, why are you trying to get rid of it? I don't know. And I would build up these layers. I would imagine sort of layers and layers and layers of thought. And even that had become a kind of that was part of my OCD, imagining these layers of thought in my head.
Yeah.
But it just do nothing. Switch on the telly, watch some telly, read a book, cook some tea for your kids, just do something else. And if you haven't sorted out that, because I would spend hours and hours ruminating, now, could you do that? Would you do that? Could you be an evil person? None of that, it doesn't have to be resolved. That's the uncertainty, isn't it? It doesn't have to be resolved. Just, okay, you could be evil. Well, there we go, Anna. We'll just leave that there.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. It doesn't have to be resolved. Living with that uncertainty and that open question defeats OCD.
Oh, completely. And
Yeah.
that is an epiphany moment, that moment where you go, oh, don't actually have to answer that question.
Yeah.
I will just bleach my kitchen floor. Not in an OCD way, because I don't have the cleanliness one, but in a kind of like, you haven't done it for ages.
Yeah, no, cool. No, I mean, that's a really good point. Yeah, and I feel when you have that kind of epiphany, that's a huge step forward.
That's massive. And you will get it, because I remember listening to lots of people speaking, and that's the other thing, is that you go, yeah, but you haven't got mine. You haven't got relationship OCD, and it's much worse than health OCD or harm OCD, and you haven't got that. And I'm thinking, and I'm like, oh no, my harm OCD. Oh, I'd love to have your OCD.
Yeah.
And we all think, oh, we'd love to have each other's, but we wouldn't, because they're not our triggers,
Exactly. Yeah,
So,
no, that is a good point.
yeah.
Comparison is the thief of all joy. Who says that?
Yeah.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And that goes the same for OCD. Comparing OCD, all you're doing is making yourself more sad and more down by saying, "Oh, it'd be easier if it was X, Y, and Z." Not necessarily, and the comparison just drags you further.
And actually, just talking about comparison, if I could just talk about regret for a minute, is that okay, Stu? Just because I think when people have been poorly for a really long time, like I had, you start regretting OCD and looking at it like this bloody thief that's nicked, so much of your life and so much joy. But you can get into this sort of spiral of regret and almost self-pity.
Yeah.
And actually, you can't regret, because it's an entirely wasted emotion. And you can get it out of perspective, because I've had great times with my kids and great moments with my children, and I know that they would think I'm a bit of a bonkers, embarrassing mother sometimes, but I know that they would think that I've done lots of good things for them, and I've had lots and lots and lots of good times. And also, I think maybe because you've had OCD, maybe that's made you more empathetic, more sympathetic, and maybe that's made you super excited about really, really simple things, like a great tasting muffin or a beautiful cloud formation in the sky, or cuddling my dog, or something really simple. I feel like people that feel the lows, you're really lucky, because you feel So you get to feel the highs, and
Yeah.
that's really nice to feel the highs.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it because because the small things become
Yeah.
pleasurable because you've gone lower than other people, for example.
Oh
Whereas if
yeah.
they've kind of lived on that neutral line their whole life,
Yeah.
they have nothing to compare even the simplest things to.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm a real believer in that if you feel those lows, you also feel the highs. And also, if you have been really poorly, you I get massive joy in just, I don't know, going for a walk and
Mm.
having a half an hour without an intrusive thought. I'm like, ooh, the joy of thinking, thinking without thinking. That's really great. you know,
Yeah, no,
um,
I agree. I
I know
agree.
it sounds silly, but um, you're a feeler, so embrace that you're a feeler. If you've got OCD, you are probably a feeler.
Mm. Absolutely. No, I love
Yeah.
it. Okay, so parenting with OCD, I can imagine has not been easy in any way.
No.
So, what advice do you have for other parents who have OCD?
If, if it's about your children and if it's harm OCD,
Mm.
um, oh, yeah, it has been really hard, but I would say that it's probably made me a better parent, actually. It might have made you a better parent as well. If you listen to the show, it might have made you a better parent because maybe you don't get as ratty over the little things. I think sometimes when you have had it, though, you can sometimes be a bit soft. So try not to be too soft as a parent, because you make allowances, for your, oh,
Mm.
I've thought that terrible thought. So now I'll let them stay up an extra half hour. Don't do that. um, but also you know, you're not a bad person for having had those thoughts.
Yeah.
That's just theory A or theory B. I can never remember which way around they are, but you know, that does not make you a bad person or a bad parent because you've had that thought. It's a thought,
Yeah.
and that's it. And it doesn't mean for 1 second, thinking something, even whether it's a good thought, thoughts are just thoughts. If you think loads of good thoughts, but you don't act on them or do anything good for anybody, well, that doesn't make any different either. Do you know what I mean by
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
A thought is just a thought. And and I promise you that as well, that you mustn't avoid the ERP because it's your children and because it's the most precious thing in the world.
Mm.
Don't avoid it. And don't think just because I've had that thought, that must be the worst one that I'm ever going to get. It's not. Something else will come along and, you'll always manage to shock yourself with the thought. But try to learn to laugh at some of them.
Yeah.
Like my middle child now she's 18, yeah, 18, and she's doing psychology and we talk about OCD actually.
Oh, wow.
We talk about it as a family. We've done ERP together. And I'm not saying that you can do that when they're little. I never mentioned it when they were little.
Mm.
But now they're bigger, we do talk about it and they just they laugh at me. And actually, in a time when you're really having an awful moment, when your kids laugh at you and laugh at the fact that you've had a thought that you might bite them on the arm, well, that's actually quite a good diffuser.
Yeah.
They just laugh and go, yeah, mum, have a bite. We all have a laugh about it. And, that's good that's diffusing the situation. But also you are not alone. Please don't think you're alone. Please,
Mm.
please don't think that you're alone because you're not.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, great advice. Okay, so let's say you've just met someone and they've asked you, they're just starting their sort of recovery journey now, and they've asked you kind of a bit of advice. What do you tell them?
I would tell them that there are sometimes you do 2 steps forward and you will definitely get a little step back,
Mm.
and that's normal. And just acceptance of that is really, really important. because sometimes you can get yourself a bit low when you go forward and you think, "Way, I'm recovered," and then you go, "Oh," So that's normal. But also, I would say, do that ERP. You have to do it. And I know that sounds harsh, but if you don't do it, you're not going to get better. And you've got to jump off the top board. For me, watching a movie, all of those kind of things, those kind of external triggers, reading nasty stories in newspapers, all of that, that's one level of ERP. But for me, my own brain and my own thoughts is the next level up. So just sitting with my own thoughts and sitting alone with them. And that's really scary. Yeah. But if you want to be truly free, you've got to embrace that ERP with every ounce of grit that you've got. Do it and you'll be free.
Nice. Yeah, love it. Okay, so you've got a billboard in Newcastle. What do you want written on that billboard for everyone to see?
Toon, black and white army. No, I'm only joking. I like Sunderland as well. Oh, yeah. I would, I would probably put, the only normal people you know are the ones you don't know very well. So don't panic. Or I might put, all will be well, because it will. And the other thing, I know I'm only allowed one.
You can have a few.
There will always be hope. That's really important. There is always hope, which is why I've got my little dog called Hope, because just when I was getting better, I went into Greg's in Newcastle and this little shot of orange came flying through the door. This was just kind of post-crisis. And she was covered in fleas and she had bites on her. And she was a little stray. And I kept her and brought her home, and I called her Hope because we give each other hope.
Oh, so that's awesome.
Yeah, so there will always be hope. And that's so important, I can't bear the idea of somebody with OCD because of a stupid thought, just a thought, and not because of the thought, because of your own reaction to that thought and your own, the way that you look at that thought. I can't bear anybody being in pain.
Yeah.
You always look at other people and think, oh, would you judge me? That's the other thing, actually. I told my best friends about my thoughts, my worst thoughts. And they don't judge you. People don't judge you anywhere near as much as you imagine they would. It's you that's judging you more than anybody else.
Absolutely, yeah. I always say people don't usually care when you tell them.
No, they don't care one jot. In fact, they laugh at me when I tell them mine. My co-host, he's an impressionist. He's great, so he's great for ERP because he does loads of Anthony Hopkins, but he does loads of impressions, and he laughs when I tell him my thoughts, and I think, oh, you're laughing at it, and I've cried for 25 years, So yeah. I don't want people to cry anymore, and I just, and I know that you can get hassled for talking out about mental health. Of course you can, but I don't care. I think it's worth it if one person feels better. And people do talk to you on social media, and I've met heaps of people even at work who said, oh, I've got that. Oh, me too. And that if that makes one person feel better, well, good.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think the people that criticize those for talking about mental health are few and far between now. And they just need a hug and their own therapist to talk through their own issues.
Yeah.
It's more of a resounding, what's the word? It's their issue, basically.
Yeah.
That they're projecting.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's great. So if you could pick up the phone to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell that Anna?
Don't go out with that Irish baritone. He was a nightmare. No. No. I would say, do the therapy, Anna. Anna, do the therapy, do the ERP. Expose yourself. Just do it. Because you save yourself a lot of years of imprisonment. That's how what OCD does. It imprisons you, and you don't need to be imprisoned. You can totally be free.
Yeah.
You've got it in you to be free.
Absolutely. Great call. And is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you wish you could have shared?
No, I think I've talked about. I think I really wanted to make sure that there's positivity that comes out of having had OCD as well, and having had any mental health problem, that there can be positive sides to it. So I don't want people to feel regret and whatever, people to feel that there might be a positive side to them having been poorly. So I hope that's come across.
Yeah, it has.
And that you can, love a sunset and all of that. Yeah. No, I think that's, I think that's everything. I think we've covered everything, haven't we? From tiredness and looking after your body and true acceptance. I did do a survey, which I thought was, I sent out a survey I devised my own survey about intrusive thoughts.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting because I didn't think anybody would fill it in. And about the types of thoughts people had. And it was amazing. Out of the 30 that we got back, even the very worst thoughts that I'd had, other people had those as well. And we asked them what's the difference between somebody with OCD and somebody without, and they were just laughing at their thoughts.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but the whole survey thing was quite interesting. I thought, ask your friends what thoughts they've had, but not in a reassurance way.
No. Yeah. Oh yeah. Don't freak out if they say none.
Yeah, don't freak out. That just means they might be a bit dull.
Yeah. Or an unactive imagination.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for coming on today, Anna, and for your vulnerability. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I hope it's helped. And thank you very much. Thank you.
So that concludes another episode of the OCDstories.com podcast. All links, resources, etc. can be found at the OCDstories.com/podcast. And disclaimer time, guys, this podcast is not therapy, it is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.